Hello, Jacksonites. Welcome back to Super Kaiju Binge. I believe that it has been a little over a year since my last episode of Super Kaiju Binge. Let's see. Texas Guy and Anthony Sarkis are here. Hello. What was it? Yep, it sure was. My last episode of Super Kaiju Binge was Monarch Legacy of Monsters. Oh, yeah, it's been over a year. May 11th, 2024. So, yes, indeed. Welcome back to Super Kaiju Binge, and welcome back to the Gamera franchise. Yes, indeed. I haven't touched Gamera since, I think, around this time of 2023. And that's because I was waiting the release of today's subject, but it took me this long to finally get around to seeing it. So today I will be reviewing the newest 13th, and for the moment now, final installment of the Gamera franchise, 2023's Gamera Rebirth, released on Netflix September of 2023, September 8th, 2023. So yes, indeed, it finally happened. After 17 years, Kadokawa, the current owners of the Gamera franchise, finally put something out after the underperformance of Gamera the Brave back in 2006. 17 years. And in my case, it's taken me 19 years almost to finally see something new in the Gamera franchise. It's a long time. And so the question is, was it worth waiting 17 years? In my case, 19 years. No. They did it again, guys. They fucked it up. Yet a fucking again. 17 years in the making, and this is what they give us. This will be another flip-flop review where I start with cons and end with pros, because kind of like Ultraman Ginga, I have mostly negative things to say about this series, and the positives are, what's the word, middling at best. So, fucking A. Gamera Rebirth is a Japanese original net animation, ONA, equivalent to, or modern day equivalent of an OVA series, original video animation, directed and co-written by Hiroyuki Seshita, the same guy who directed and co-wrote the Godzilla Earth trilogy, also on Netflix, and animated by ENGI, also the guys who animated the Godzilla Earth trilogy. It is a reboot of the Gamera franchise following Gamera the Brave from 2006, the first animated entry in the franchise, and the first entry in the franchise's Reiwa era. The series was released worldwide on Netflix September 7th, 2023, and the final episode aired December 27th, 2024. Really? Almost 4 months to release 6 episodes? Oh, wait a minute. That was the manga. Never mind. I got confused. So hang on. The final episode aired Oh wait, I guess the whole okay. I'm now sadly been conditioned to the episode a week schedule, but this was towards the end of that era where whenever Netflix released the show, they just dropped the whole thing. Okay, so the whole thing was released September 7th, 2023. Yes, I am horror and metal. Indeed, growing my hair out. My hair's never been this long before. Okay, so the production of where is it? God damn it. Okay, here we go. The production. I want to talk about the production of Gamera Rebirth before I get into my personal history. On November 16th, 2022, Kadokawa announced plans for a new Gamera production entitled Gamera Rebirth, which would be released globally on Netflix. Shizuke Kaneko, the director of the Heisei Gamera trilogy, had proposed an idea for a new film, but Kadokawa had already proceeded with this project by the time Kaneko had presented his own pitch. Regardless, Kaneko had expressed his support for the project. In February of 23, Kadokawa revealed the cast and staff. The series would be animated by ENGI with Hiroyuki Seshita directing, who co-directed Polygon Pictures' Godzilla anime trilogy. Tetsu Iijima producing, and Atsushi Tamara designing the characters, and Kan Takahama designing the monsters. A teaser released in January debuted footage, albeit briefly, from the series and revealed that it would consist of 6 episodes and feature 5 additional enemy kaiju. In March, Kadokawa released a new key visual poster, a synopsis, and a full trailer. As ENGI being a relatively new company, production of Gamera Rebirth and building ENGI's CGI department were simultaneously progressed, which increased everybody's workloads. Red flag number 1. A number of references to previous films and scrapped projects and unused ideas were made, and the time setting of the series is 1989, is to represent both eras of Showa and Heisei. Designs of Gamera and Gauss, and the first scene of Gamera fighting against a small flock of Gauss in the first episode, were reused from the 2015 short film, and Katsuhito Ishii, the director of the 2015 short film, was credited as the designer of Gamera. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, later on. Okay. Seshita originally prepared fighting scenes twice or 5 times more than actual ones, including more diverse abilities and characteristics of kaiju. However, he had to cut them due to budget and schedule, and noted the difficulty to insert kaiju battles in every episode due to budgetary constraints. One of the policies for battle scenes was not to depict human casualties by Gamera, which I don't have an issue with. Therefore, such depictions were avoided during Gamera's appearances in early episodes in Tokyo. Gamera arrived at Tokyo after most evacuations were completed, and he threw Gauss and Jiger into open areas without people. The direction was also effective to reduce production costs. Seshita also highlighted the concept of children who have been protected by Gamera, and in return, they protect Gamera. So, some of that stuff that was noted kind of does explain some of the events of this show, and doesn't fully confirm a couple of my theories, but it does add fuel to the fire. So my personal history for Gamera Rebirth, Of course, when it was announced that there would be a new Gamera project on the way, of course, I was excited after 17 goddamn years. Uh, and especially with this big kaiju renaissance that we're going through right now. I mean, I think it took a little too long, but I was like, finally, Gamera is getting some love in this new era of kaiju that we're going through right now. And I did see the teaser trailer when it was dropped. Pardon Roman in the background. Actually, hang on. Nah, I'm not listening to that. Sorry, Ben. No. Okay. Excuse me. So I saw the I am here by myself with Roman again, by the way. So if I have to get up a few times, I beg your pardon. So I watched the teaser when it was dropped, and I was interested, but I was already a bit cautious because it was bringing back some Vietnam flashbacks regarding the Godzilla Earth trilogy. And then when I found out that this series would be made by the same people that made the Godzilla Earth trilogy, a good chunk of my interest immediately dropped off. I immediately said to myself, oh no, are we going to get a repeat of those 3 movies, but with Gamera? So, leading up to the release of Gamera Rebirth, Kadokawa would be dropping these like neon silhouette, like lightning vein nervous system type posters of the various kaiju that were being selected for the show. And I would keep an eye out for each one. And I was a little excited because at least I was like, okay, like we haven't seen any of these Gamera. It's like some of these Gamera kaiju we haven't seen since their movie, like Jiger and Guiron. So I was like, okay. And the designs did definitely get me interested a little bit because I was like, okay, some of these designs are actually kind of cool. And it'd be kind of cool to see Gamera go up against these characters because we haven't seen them in almost 50 years. So, okay, maybe I'll give this a try. But when the series dropped, I just didn't watch it. I saw a couple snippets of reviews here and there, and I got a couple of snippets of information, mainly from Shawnee Boy, because he'd seen the show before I did. And I asked him a couple details, and all of those details and all of that information that I was hearing, I lost interest. Straight up. I just was like, ah, man, I don't know if I want to sit through this. So I just never did. I was just getting a bunch of red flags left and right. And I was just like, nah, I'd rather watch something else. But it wasn't until earlier this week, or like right after I did my Ultraman Ginga review, like deciding, like, what do I want to do to break up the monotony? And I do want to get back into Super Kaiju Binge, but I want to I want to start to complete this. And the first thing that came to mind was maybe it's time to finally sit down and watch Gamera Rebirth. So that's what I did. I had Netflix hooked back up in my house, and I spent the last week watching 1 episode a day. And by the end of it, boy, was I disappointed. I'm not even going to remotely beat around the bush with this one, guys. I wouldn't quite say it's Return of the Kennys. text this guy, but this show sucks. Straight fucking up. I did not like this series hardly at all. Now, I will say also right off the bat that this show isn't as like hair-pullingly frustrating and awful as the Godzilla Earth trilogy, but I would probably say it's more disappointing than the Godzilla Earth trilogy because this looked like much more traditional Gamera type material. So the fact that when these writers and directors actually try to do something that is much more conventional for a kaiju project, they still don't know how to do it, and they still don't know what the fuck they're doing. So yeah, I was disappointed. This definitely has become one of my least favorite installments of the entire kaiju genre, and is definitely one of my least favorite Gamera installments. Fucking A. This is a very problematic series. So let's jump right into the plots for the episode. Thankfully, there's only 6, although sadly, they're all kind of layered. Okay. Episode 1, titled Over Tokyo, also directed by... Holy crap, he's fucking still alive? The entire series was directed by Hiroyuki Seshita. What, really? And episode 5 was written by Nissan Takahashi. Oh, wait, no. Nah. He ghost wrote it. So they probably just took this script from something Nissan Takahashi wrote. Nissan Takahashi, if you guys remember, was the main screenwriter for the Showa Gamera series. He wrote, or at least co-wrote, every single Gamera film from Gamera the Giant Monster to Gamera Super Monster. But he passed away in 2015. Okay. Yeah, episode 1, titled Over Tokyo. Opening in media res, 11-year-old Boko, it's a strange name, records a voice message to his friend Joe on a beach, recalling a promise about their last summer together. Earlier that summer in Tokyo, Boko, Joe, and their friend Junichi planned to buy a communications radio when Boko rescues an odd-looking turtle stuck in the pond at their treehouse. They are soon accosted by neighborhood bullies led by Brody, who steals their money. Meanwhile, in New Guinea, the Eustace Foundation, a mining company, has uncovered multiple eggs which hatch and grow into a swarm of flying creatures, the Gauss, of course, soon converging on Tokyo. To get their money back, Boko and his friends confront Brody and his friends at an arcade, where they're caught up in an attack by the Gauss. While the flock of Gauss overpowers the military forces, some of its individuals turn attention toward the children. The children are rescued by the arrival of Gamera, a giant turtle-like kaiju who kills the larger Gauss after wiping out the flock of smaller Gauss. Shortly thereafter, a rescue team led by Agent James Tazaki and Dr. Emiko Melchiori picks up the children for questioning. Episode 2, Undercurrent. Okay. After their encounter with Gamera, the kids learn from there's a lot of spelling errors on this. From Tazaki and Emiko, the history of the kaiju and the Eustace Foundation's research, and are asked to cooperate to learn more about the monsters. Later, Brody reaches out to the others with information he picked up from his father, a commander within the USJF. At the Eustace Foundation, kaiju eggs are kept and hatch into lizard-like creatures and escape into the sewers. Brody leads the kids to a sewer before Emiko and James set out to find them. Brody's father, Commander Osborn, attempts to hold off an advancing Gamera with no avail. The children encounter the adult kaiju, Jiger, but are rescued by Tazaki and Emiko's team. Jiger surfaces, beginning a rampage in pursuit of the kids, before Gamera descends to combat Jiger. In the fight, the military attacks both monsters, but Boko realizes that Gamera is protecting them. At Boko's urging, Brody convinces his dad to focus on Jiger, and then a recovered Gamera finishes Jiger off before departing. The children are taken back to the military base, where Brody's father angrily slaps him for his recklessness. Meanwhile, another kaiju in the depths of the South Pacific awakens. Episode 3, Run Silent, Run Deep. Tazaki and Emiko talk the children's parents into allowing them to accompany an investigation at Yonaguni Island. Meanwhile, the ray-like kaiju Zigra begins attacking ships out at sea. On the voyage, the nerdish Junichi becomes enthused at the advanced technology, bonding with Emiko. After sharing her theories, Junichi becomes saddened to overhear Brody talking to her friends about her eccentricities. The ship is soon attacked by Zigra, and Tazaki undergoes a claustrophobic panic attack. Right off the bat, I'm going to tell you right now, this scene is so forced and stupid. Gamera arrives and fights Zigra, but is incapacitated. However, Gamera releases a shockwave and radio signal which disorients Zigra. Realizing this, Junichi convinces the captain to reach a nearby island's radio station with the support of her friends. Reaching the island, the kids are pursued by Zigra, who climbs onto land. Junichi and the team reach the tower, where she and Emiko work on transmitting the same signal Gamera is emitting. Gamera reemerges and finishes the disoriented Zigra off. The next day, the team continues the journey to Yonaguni and learn that the monsters are powered by an element known as Aurelium. Episode 4, simply titled Kill. It's an odd title. On Okinawa Island, it is discovered the kaiju samples are healing due to being in proximity to the Aurelium crystals. Tazaki considers quitting after being shaken by Zigra's attack, and his belief the board is keeping important information from him. Samples are being collected from Zigra's body. Then a blade-faced kaiju Guiron soon attacks. Devouring Zigra's remains, Guiron builds up his own mass. At the Eustis mining base, Joe becomes suspicious of the facility. Emiko takes the children to a cave, revealing the mummified squid-like kaiju, Virus. Joe becomes increasingly suspicious, but leaves after an argument with Boko. Afterwards, Boko talks to Brody about Joe's troubled past, regarding the deaths of his mother and brother. Guiron soon attacks the island. As the children meet back up, Gamera returns and faces Guiron. When Gamera gets his arm severed, Boko feels Gamera's pain, realizing he has a psychic connection to Gamera. The children end up reaching the cavern as Gamera kills Guiron but is left injured. Boko touches an Aurelium crystal and experiences a vision. Episode 5, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Boko and his friends discover that the kaiju are engineered bioweapons created by an extinct but advanced ancient civilization. Okay, so this isn't very clear in the show. Who seeks to wipe out humanity and start anew. To control the kaiju, they sacrifice children with a specific genetic code. And Boko carries this code, explaining his link to Gamera, who was also created to wipe out humanity, but it was altered by a protector, or it was altered to be a protector by a defector back then, 100,000 years prior. The Eustace Foundation was found by the successors of the ancient civilizations. When Boko and his friends are imprisoned, Emiko is revealed to be the niece of one of the board's leaders, Nora Melchiori, and has lured the children into a trap. Emiko plans to awaken Virus and usurp her aunt. Tazaki helps the children reach an evacuation shuttle. Virus awakens, pursuing the shuttle as it launches, and the still injured Gamera battles Virus. Gamera bisects Virus as it attacks the shuttle, but the ship is heavily damaged. The children and Tazaki enter the escape pods, but Joe seemingly sacrifices himself to pull the lever and is left to crash into the atmosphere. Gamera catches the pod as it falls to Earth, and the children wake up beside the unconscious Gamera. The final episode, titled Childhood's End, months prior, a hybrid Gauss was engineered by the Eustace Foundation's board. In the present, this specimen emerges following Virus's death, devouring Emiko and then Virus's corpse. On the beach, Boko mourns Joe before Tazaki God, there's so many spelling errors on this. Before Tazaki reaches out to the Prime Minister to help revive Gamera against the invading kaiju. As the mutated S-Gauss advances, military and government forces set up defenses for Gamera. S-Gauss arrives and pursues Boko through their link. Boko's adrenaline speeds Gamera's recovery, and Gamera fights and kills the S-Gauss after seemingly taking an element from Gamera versus Garasharp, Gauss sticking his tongue down Gamera's throat. Okay. Right? But through this process, Gamera is infected by its RNA virus. What the hell is that? The Eustace board attempts to use the virus to brainwash Gamera, but with Boko's urging, Gamera resists the virus and destroys the board in a very Godzilla Earth-like scene. Gamera is drained of power and crumbles to dust, to Boko's grief. Returning to their homes and families, the children try to carry on, though Boko mourns Joe. Tazaki later shows the kids an uncovered egg with a hatchling looking exactly like a Gamera the Brave version of this version of Gamera. In a mid-credit scene, Tazaki uses the Irelium to create and distribute iPhone-like devices. In the children's treehouse, a still-living Joe sends a message to their radio. So that's the end of the series. Damn. Where do I even begin? What do I think of this show's story? Well, on one hand, I can see that the writers and director are trying their best to reintroduce Gamera to a modern audience, especially to a modern worldwide audience, as Gamera is not really like anywhere near as well known of a character as Godzilla is outside of Japan. So I can see that there is some effort to modernize Gamera, but also give Gamera fans something that they've been wanting to see for a long time. But it's just a shame that no matter what these guys were doing, it just all sucks. This has got to be, honestly, one of the most unenjoyable monster movie or monster show experiences I've had in quite a long while. There's a lot of ideas here, and there's moments in the show that are almost entertaining, but none of it really comes together and coalesces into something that's cool. there's a reason why I went over the production. So I'm just going to get one issue that I have with this show right off the bat. One of my cons is, well, actually, I didn't even write it down, but it is a criticism. The series feels very restrained. It feels like whenever the writers or directors wanted to do something new and interesting for the franchise, they had to cut it down and cut it short due to budgetary constraints. And it really shows. So in the end, this kind of out. This kind of just feels like more of the same, but that's also a con in and of itself. But the stuff that this is more of, I just don't dig. So I have 6 pros, and I have 10 cons. So we're going to start with the cons, just like Ultraman Ginga. Con number 1 is the boring or unlikable cast. So the kid characters we'll start with. We have Hiroki Boko Wada. It's a strange name. Voiced by Hisako. I watched this with the Japanese dub with English subtitles. There is a English dub, but I just didn't bother. Yeah, Hisako Kanemoto voices Boko. We have Satoru Joe Matsuoka, voiced by Yoshitsugu Matsuoka. Hello, Roman. Junichi Ichihara, played by Aki Toyosaki. And Douglas Ken Osborne, a.k.a. Brody, voiced by Subaru Kimura. And honestly, all 4 of these kids range from annoying to flat as a plateau. Hiroki, I guess, mostly by default, is the most likable of the, or Boko, as he's called, is the most likable of the main 4. But that's really not saying much. That's only just by default. He is a very typical Gamera kid. He is a little whiny. He's a bit bratty. He's a bit screechy. He kind of has a very snarky and borderline kind of disrespectful relationship with his mom. But somehow he's always in the right place at the right time, and he somehow knows kind of instinctually what's going on with Gamera and the monsters. And it's all very typical and very standard and bland, in my opinion. Boko is just a standard Gamera kid, in my opinion. Joe is the muscle of the group, and he's probably my least favorite because he starts out as like trying to be the older brother figure to Boko. But as the show goes on, he's just kind of a stubborn, obstinate and defiant and just asshole of a character, in my opinion. He's always getting into fights and butting heads with everybody else around him, even adults. He's getting all up in their face and talking shit and just acting like a dick. For sometimes it's warranted, like when they're being attacked by Zigra and he's saying to the characters, hey, listen to Boko. He knows what's going on with these monsters. But then he's, especially once they get to, I mean, I guess like because the plots kind of explain it, I guess at that point it makes sense. Like once they find where Virus is being held, him acting like an asshole and being suspicious, turns out he was right. But they just make him too unlikable, too annoying, and too asshole-ish, honestly, to like by the time he makes his sacrifice. So I just can't buy his sacrifice as being anything noteworthy. Junichi is, or June as she's referred to, is the smarts of the group. Now, getting into one of my minor pros with this show is that they do kind of emulate Stranger Things, and Junichi kind of reminds me of who is the smart kid? Yeah, thank you, honey. Dusty Bun. Junichi is kind of like a female version of Dustin from Stranger Things. More so because I guess Dustin's only the brains of the group by default. But she's very technologically savvy, and somehow she can analyze and understand what's going on with the monsters and all the technology just by looking at it and guessing, which Dustin cannot do. Don't give a shit what you say. But she too is just very plain and boring. Like if you see any anime show where there is a group dynamic and there's someone who's tech savvy, that's her in a nutshell. Nothing more, nothing less. And then finally, we have Brody. He's also kind of the muscle of the group, but by the end, and he starts out as a bully. And what's funny is that he's an American and he's living in Japan. And he goes we first meet him when he's walking around with his friends. He's spouting off all these racial slurs and racial stereotypes to the Japanese, which I find to be odd because this is a Japanese show. But so at first they make him out to be super, super unlikable. But then somehow he gets wrapped up with the main trio. And by the end of the series, he's acting like he's been friends with them since day one of their lives. Which at first might sound kind of clunky, but I guess it kind of works. So I actually would say maybe I guess Brody is my favorite, but he doesn't give a very good first impression. So yeah, there's that. But then there's also a couple adult characters. We got James Joshua Tazaki, voiced by Mamoru Miyano, of all people, the guy who voices Ultraman Zero. Shit you not. And then we have Emiko Melchiori, voiced by Saori Hayami. These are the main two adult characters that we follow for the majority of the series. Tazaki, I don't really much care for this guy. At first, he's also kind of a very typical and standard, like, male anime lead. He somehow has all these skills and he knows all this knowledge and information about anything and everything. But then he has to go through some kind of arc because at first he doesn't much care for the kids and he's just doing a job. But by the end of the series, he realizes he was working for the bad guy this whole time. And then he has to like redeem himself and save kids and save the world. But he's just not very well written. He's very like kind of stubborn and dickish for a good chunk of the series. Like, sorry, hold on. Oof, ow. And I need a drink. Yeah, Tazaki is very inconsistent. Like he flip-flops back and forth between being likable and helpful and unlikable and dickish. So by the end of the series, I just felt so disconnected to this dude. Even despite the fact that he's voiced by one of my favorite voice actors in Japanese history, I just don't really have a good impression on this guy. And Emiko Melchiori, at first, she comes off like being an extremely typical female anime lead. You know, she's very innocent and polite and kind and sweet, especially to the kids. But when they reveal the twist that she's actually been a bad guy this whole time and she wants to sacrifice the kids to Virus to take over the world, well, I mean, I guess it is technically a good twist because I did not see it coming. And it definitely threw me for a loop when it's revealed, oh, yeah, I'm going to sacrifice these kids to a giant man eating squid from space. What? Oh, okay. It does kind of come a little bit out of left field. And actually, now that I think about it, it kind of reminds me of what they did with Gamera versus Jiger with the aliens wanting, or not Jiger, Gamera versus Guiron with the aliens wanting to eat the kids' brains. But then after the twist, what's her name again? Emiko just kind of, her performance and the voice actor's performance gets much lower in quality, in my opinion. Like, she just keeps spouting off the same, like, oh, I'm going to sacrifice these kids. I'm going to destroy the human population. I'm going to take over the world. I'm going to usurp my auntie's position in a big worldwide corporation. And again and again and again and again throughout the rest of the series. And then all of her schemes fail and she gets eaten by Gauss before it mutates. Like, so in the end, her as a villain, she's totally inconsequential and totally ineffective, in my opinion. So the human cast, yeah, it's a very boring or unlikable cast. I can't get behind any of the characters. Nah, not for me. Con number 2 is the slow pacing. Now, this show, surprisingly, each episode is 45 minutes long. And I would have expected each episode to at least be a half hour long, but no, they're almost an hour. But I actually think that's kind of a detriment to this show because there's a lot of fucking filler in this series. It's kind of similar to The Walking Dead, which is a weird comparison. They start with a little bit of action at the beginning of each episode, and they end each episode with a little bit of action, but the ensuing half hour in between drags and plods along like a son of a bitch. There's either boring exposition, boring technobabble, or just characters lamenting the days of their lives and having existential crises. And it's boring and uninteresting and unenjoyable as fuck. Damn, all of these cons are significant. The biggest issue, or not the biggest, but one of the biggest issues that I have with this show is the ugly ass animation. Now, like I said earlier, the same studio that did the Netflix Godzilla trilogy also did the animation for this series. And believe it or not, I actually think the animation is worse than the Godzilla anime trilogy. Now, as the production notes detailed, it seemed like the budget and resources for this series were limited as the studio itself was putting itself together as they were making this show. So I guess that does explain why the show looks the way it does, or at least it's a explanation. But it's not an acceptable explanation because if that was the case, then why didn't you wait until you guys were on your feet and then started making this show? That way it would have looked better. Because I've got to say, I'm not a fan of CGI animated anime. I prefer traditionally hand-drawn cartoon-style animation for anime. Um, and I especially don't like when traditional animation and CGI animation for anime are blended because, anime has a very distinctive look and style, and that doesn't translate really to CGI stuff. And that's actually one big reason why I'm really not interested in seeing Godzilla Singular Point, because that's what they do. The human characters are traditionally drawn, but the kaiju and giant robots are CG models. And I don't like that choice. I don't like that style. And that's not exactly what they do, but it does look like they used a like sometimes they did some hand drawn stuff. They did CG models slash motion capture for the monsters. And they did whatever CG pseudo 3D style of animation for the human characters. And all of these different animation styles just don't mix. The monsters do look somewhat decent, like they're detailed fine. Their designs are cool, but I'll get to that a little later. But how they're animated is so inconsistent, like the way they move is so inconsistent. And the human characters are all so ugly. All the designs are very stiff and awkward. And most of the human characters, their facial expressions stay the same for the entirety of the series. Even if they're angry or sad, maybe their eyebrows change, but their facial structure doesn't change at all. And a lot of the mouth movements don't really match the dialogue. It just kind of seems like they talk like, it's almost laughable, honestly, sometimes. But like, especially when the characters are talking really fast and when they're in a real life or death situation where they're saying a lot of things at the same time, some of the mouths they hardly move at all. So the characters are going, but their mouths just going, and it just doesn't look good. But the way they move too, just like with the monsters, it's extremely inconsistent. When it's a normal just sitting around and people are just talking and bullshitting around, I guess they move sort of normally, I guess. But during an action scene or a chase scene, the animation is extremely choppy and jittery. It's like they move almost like robots. It's really distracting, and it just looks like absolute shit. And the monster scenes too are also very inconsistent. Sometimes the animation is fairly smooth, like whenever Gamera flies, that looks fine, or any of the monsters fly. Or when Gamera or not Gamera, well, Gamera too, but when Zigra is swimming around, it looks okay. But whenever the monsters are in a real high octane fight, which isn't very often, um, the animation is again very choppy and very jittery. And at times, honestly, some of the animation just does not look like it was finished. Um, and also, this isn't a very colorful series, in my opinion. Too, there's a lot of really muted and desaturated colors, and almost. I hate to make this comparison, but it almost kind of does look like a Zack Snyder project. There's a lot of dull reds and browns and tan or beige colors. There is some bright colors, like when there's an explosion or a monster uses a beam attack, but they're kind of few and far between, in my opinion. Although Gauss, I like the colorization for Gauss. It's a very bright, vibrant red, but that's getting ahead of myself. I'll talk about the monsters a little later. But yeah, the animation in this show, it's crap. It looks worse than the Godzilla Earth trilogy. I cannot believe I'm actually saying that. And this same studio also did the animation for the Netflix Transformers movies, the War for Cybertron trilogy. I think they might have also done the Netflix Ultraman anime. And they also did the animation for Pacific Rim the Black. So I'm really not interested in seeing anything else that this animation studio has put out. But some of it I have to watch. Fuck me. Con number 4 is the lack of Gamera in true Gamera film style tradition. So, real quick, let's do the math. So let's say this series is about 270 minutes long total. Okay, yeah. So that's about 4.5 hours. And I would be willing to bet that Gamera has about a half hour's worth of screen time for the entire series. They literally save him only for the last 5 to 10 minutes of each episode. That is it. Except for, like, he is in a little bit of the beginning of episode 4 when he's fighting Zigra. And he's in a little bit of the beginning of episode. Well, he's in and out most of episode 6, but every time you do see him, it's for a quick, brief second. But at the very most, I'd say Gamera has maybe 40 minutes of screen time in a 4.5 hour long show. Very disappointing. You made us wait 17 years for another Gamera project, and you use the title character as little as possible. Nah, come on, guys, you can do better. Actually, no, I'm actually going to save that for a little later. I actually don't think Gamera or Kadokawa can do better than this. But yeah, lack of Gamera, it's a big problem. It almost is. I'd say it's more frustrating than Gamera versus Barugan, but it's as frustrating as Gamera 3 Revenge of Iris. Con number 6, you could probably see this one. Okay, hang on. Let me get to this one too. This is a very brief one, and it might be kind of petty and minor, but it really bothered me upon seeing this. I don't like that Gamera loses his arm. It feels like it's ripping off an element from Gamera 3 Revenge of Iris, Speak of the Devil. Gamera loses the same damn arm at the end of that movie. It's his right arm. I know the context is a bit different. In Gamera 3, of course, he blows his own arm off to destroy the title monster. But then in this show, Gamera gets his arm sliced off by Guiron. And it would have been one thing if he was able to regenerate his arm, like in the next episode, but he doesn't. But somehow he's still able to morph his arms into his sea turtle style flying flippers whenever he's flying like Superman. But when he goes back to being on his regular legs, when he's on the ground, his arm just retreats back to being the stump. And it's lame. It hurts the fight scenes from then on. So, I know it sounds stupid. It might sound really petty and really minor, but it really bothered me. It felt like fake tension and fake stakes being increased. Oh, Gamera's got to fight 2 more monsters with just one arm. Yeah, he's a giant turtle that shoots fireballs and can shoot a beam that destroys the moon. Why can't he regrow an arm? Lame. And speaking of the fight scenes, con number, God damn it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6. In also true Gamera style fashion, the monster fights in this show are pretty poor. I'm sorry to say. The shitty animation certainly doesn't help, but the fight scenes themselves, looking past that, are very lethargic, anticlimactic, underwhelming, and uninteresting, in my opinion. In the first episode, where it kind of literally is a CG recreation of the 2015 Gamera trailer, where Gamera is swatting his hands around and grabbing Gauss and squishing them in his hands. That's decent. And also, he then proceeds to shoot down larger Gauss with his fireballs. And again, that's fine. But Gamera, like, fighting every other monster is just that: lethargic, underwhelming, anticlimactic, and just lame. He starts his fight with Jiger kind of cool. He bursts out from underground and he's like holding Jiger above his head with both of his arms and he's roaring to the sky. But then he gets stabbed in the armpit with Jiger's penis tail. And then he just falls over screeching in pain. And then he gets stabbed a bunch more times by Jiger. But then he grabs on to her tail, throws her into a field, and sets her on fire with a couple fireballs. It's lame. Let's see. Gamera's fight with Zigra is also kind of lame. Once again, proving that Gamera is just not very good at doing underwater battles. Or at least anybody who owns Gamera is not good at doing underwater battles. Because Godzilla versus Kong, this is not. And then at the end, as Zigra, did I say Jiger? Zigra, excuse me. As Zigra is coming to shore to try to kill the kids, all Gamera does is get again stung by Zigra's penis tail, and then Gamera sets Zigra on fire with one of his fireballs. That's it. It's less it's less satisfying than how Zigra was killed in his movie. And that movie still sucks, so that's really saying something. Yeah, the monster fights in this show, they just suck. They're poorly animated. They're very unenjoyable. They're anticlimactic most of the time. They're too short. They're not very exciting or fun. And God damn, this show just gets worse and worse as I keep talking about it. Yeah, I don't like the monster fights. Except for maybe Gamera versus S Gauss. But even then, that's not all that great. I think that's just more funny and shocking, seeing Gamera get a giant needle tongue forced down his throat by Gauss. Again, like what Meadow said. Kinky. But yeah, if you want to watch this show and see entertaining monster fights, you're going to be disappointed. But then again, we haven't really known the Gamera franchise for having the most entertaining monster fights, but come on, this is just ridiculous. Con number 7, Gamera and Boko's connection is very undercooked. Now, I know they do explain that Boko is a descendant of a child that the ancient civilization genetically created to have a special genetic code, which, that's not even really stated in the show. I'm just presuming based on what the show provides. But So I see what they're doing. They're kind of trying to harken back to what was going on between Gamera and what was her name? Steven Seagal's daughter. Oh crap! What the hell is her name? Asagi. That's her name. Yeah. So they're trying to make Boko like a new version of Asagi from Gamera Guardian of the Universe, which is all well and good. I actually would not have minded that approach to be done again, but the problem is that it's very underused and underdeveloped. The first sign that Boko and Gamera share some kind of psychic link is when Gamera loses his arm. Boko feels sharp pain on his arm. That's really about it. Like, Gamera gets sliced up by Guiron and Gauss and slammed around by Virus and Jiger a whole bunch of times throughout the series, but that's the only time. Like, if this was going by Gamera Guardian of the Universe laws, every time that Gamera got impaled by a penis tail or sliced up with a laser or sliced, or even fuck, Guiron impales Gamera with his knife head, like full on impales Gamera, but Boko doesn't feel that. But when he loses his arm, oh, Boko feels that, but that's about it. There's no real, like, it's not even implied like it is in Gamera Guardian of the Universe. Gamera and Boko's connection, aside from Boko feeling the pain, I think there was one or two other occasions where Boko felt something or saw something that Gamera was experiencing, but the point being is that the connection between Boko and Gamera, I honestly feel like it just should not have been there whatsoever. I see what they're doing. Again, they're trying to, it's obviously a big reference to the Heisei Gamera trilogy, but it's so underused, it may as well just not even be there. Sorry to say. Con number 8, Gamera dies. Now, this goes into actually con number 9, is that this show has a massive super sequel bait cliffhanger ending. Now, I would not have an issue with this ending, but the fact that it's been nearly 2 years since this show dropped, and let's see. Regarding a potential sequel, the series production committee, including the director and other executives, is willing to produce additional seasons with more budgets and increased budgets and more fight scenes, though its future is uncertain. Seshita noted that he has enough ideas for up to 5 seasons, including returns of classic antagonists, and he pointed a possibility of a future live-action adaptation if the series is successful. Seshita also hopes the series to eventually become one of the stepping stones for the revival of the Gamera franchise for the future. That's all well and good. I would accept more, hopefully, if it was better than this. But the fact that it's been nearly 2 years since this show dropped, and when it dropped, it seemed to just come and go in the snap of a finger. Like, there was a tiny bit of hype when it did drop. There was a bit of a reaction when everybody who is a kaiju YouTuber watched it and reviewed it. But then that's it. And in the near 2 years since this show has dropped, there's been absolutely zero word. Just like Godzilla Singular Point, there has been no word whatsoever on if there will be a continuation for this show. And honestly, I kind of feel like that's for the better. If it's going to be helmed by these guys to give us more of this crap, I don't want to see it. But I think the fact that this show just came and went in the snap of a finger, and the suspicion that I have that Kadokawa wanted to put as little as possible into this series to reduce risk of, if this show was to flop or underperform, then Kadokawa wouldn't have lost very much. And with how crappy the animation is, with how poor the monster fights are, and the fact that there has been zero word on a continuation, I would not be surprised if that was true. Going back to my 8th con, Gamera dies. Like, I kind of saw it coming. I still don't like it. Gamera spent the whole series getting his ass kicked, and he's trying to save the world, and then for him to just die like that at the very end, it feels very anticlimactic, lackluster, and underwhelming. And you know me, I don't like it when characters that I like die. So this just even further proves my point. And I also, again, just really don't like the super sequel bait ending. Like, that's why I have an issue with it, because there has been nothing else that has been announced to come for this series. This super sequel bait ending, it feels like a ending for a modern day Godzilla movie almost nowadays. It's just frustrating and annoying and irritating, and I just don't like it. But for my 10th con, taking a page out of Trevor Boy's book regarding Terminator Dark Fate, Gamera Rebirth feels like too little, too late. But I kind of went on I got sidetracked, and everything that I was talking about regarding the cliffhanger ending, like, you guys waited 17 years. 17 years. And with the kaiju genre experiencing a massive rebirth in 2013, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, like, hell, we've gotten 9 Godzilla movies in the last 10 years, I think. Yeah, 9 Godzilla films. Kong has gotten 3 more films in the last 10 years. Ultraman has been released by Mill Creek, and almost the entire franchise it has been distributed to the U.S. Kamen Rider is now finally getting some love here across in the States. Super Sentai got a bunch of its shows released between 2015 and 2022, I believe. So almost every single like tentpole tokusatsu or kaiju franchise has gotten some kind of revival and has like been welcomed by the community as a worthy revival for their franchises. But it took Kadokawa 17 years to give us something Gamera related, and this is the best that you can do? Seriously? No, this is not acceptable, guys. You should have had more faith in your product in being welcomed by its audience. Like, Gamera has fans. There is an audience that wants to see more Gamera content, especially now more than ever with all of this kaiju and tokusatsu media that we're being surrounded by. But this is the best you can do for poor Gamera? Nah, this is not acceptable. So, yeah, this show is too little, too late. And it's very, very frustrating. So with all these cons, I do still have 6 pros, but admittedly, yeah, some of them are kind of minor. Pro number 1 is the serviceable music. I list it purely as serviceable. because outside the Heisei Gamera trilogy, the Gamera franchise isn't really well known for having fabulous music. And this show doesn't really do anything to change that status quo. But the opening theme song, Japanese punk rock band Wanima provided both opening and ending songs. Natsuake and Fly and Dive, an acoustic version of Gamera March, the iconic song used in the Showa films, was also inserted somewhere. I don't remember hearing that. The opening theme, I do think, is decent. It is catchy. It feels like a typical anime opening song, but I mean, this is an anime, so I guess it is fitting. And it does get you more hyped up for the show than the entirety of the series in and of itself. But yeah, it is a decent song. And there is a music stinger, I've heard it be pronounced as, that plays when Gamera shows up and he starts fighting a monster. Hello, Roman. Where are you going? Oh, okay. But yeah, there's like a kind of a guitar style riff that's played whenever Gamera is getting ready to fight a monster, and it's okay, but ultimately it's also kind of disappointing because the monster fights turn out to be so crappy. But the music in and of itself, if it was used for other things, like if Kong and Godzilla were getting ready to fight a monster in a new MonsterVerse movie, it would be more fitting there. But yeah, the music is just serviceable, in my opinion. Pro number 2 is I do like the Stranger Things vibes that this show goes for, mostly in the first episode. The setup and inciting incident of this show is very reminiscent of Stranger Things. And actually, the big main trailer for this show, when it was released, immediately gave off some Stranger Things vibes. It had kind of a similar color scheme, that neon pinkish reddish color that permeated the first season of Stranger Things. So I really dug that. But yeah, the inciting incident's very similar to the first season of Stranger Things. A band of small kids, or a band of young kids are unknowingly thrown into a life or death situation by a big government experiment that goes wrong, and they are rescued at the last moment by an unexpected supernatural ally. I know it's not the best explanation or description of what happens in the first season of Stranger Things, but there are a fair bit of similarities between the first season of Stranger Things and the first episode of this show. And also the dynamic of the kids is also a bit similar to what goes on in Stranger Things. Although this show lacks both a Mike and an L, in my opinion. But yeah, if you are a Stranger Things fan, you can pick up on some of the influences that show had on this show in its initial beginning. Hold on. Excuse me. So there's that. Pro number 3 is there are some good monster kills. Or actually, let me. I'll talk about 3 and 4. There is some very minute amount of decent monster action, But all of the monsters are killed in pretty entertaining and creative ways. But talk about the monster action first. Like I said, when Gamera initially appears in the first episode and he starts killing off those miniature Gauss, it is kind of cool. There's also some decent kaiju carnage in this show, and also true Gamera fashion. This tends to be more gory, although I think of any Gamera movie or show, this is, well, no, the original doesn't really have much gore. But at least in all the installments where Gamera fights monsters, this is probably the tamest installment of the entire franchise. There is some gore, but it's very brief and kind of fleeting. But we do see some people getting eaten by both mini Jigers and mini Gauss. Um, and of course, Gamera kills all his foes in various gory ways. But also, so when the Gauss are going around shooting down planes in the first episode, that is somewhat entertaining. And probably the most entertaining bit of kaiju action for the entire show is when S. Gauss initially shows up at Okinawa Island and the military are trying to hold it off to protect Gamera. They're firing from the beach because Gauss is out in the ocean. They're firing tanks and shells and bullets, bombs, and missiles at Gauss left and right, literally. And they have to try to use strategy. Like they focus fire on one of Gauss's wings, then they focus fire on another one of Gauss's wings, then they focus fire on his head and his neck. And at first it does seem to work, but then S. Gauss reveals a supercharged supersonic laser that just decimates huge swaths of the landscape on the island. It is kind of cool, and also does feel, in a fun way, a bit like an anime style over the top ability, which is kind of cool. But going to the monster kills, again, in true typical Gamera fashion, Gamera kills his foes in creative and gory ways. Gauss and Jiger, he just kind of, well, and Virus too, not Virus, Zigra, excuse me, he just kind of blows them up with his fireballs and sets them on fire. But still, it is pretty explosive and bombastic whenever he does. He kills Guiron. This is probably my favorite kill of the entire series. And actually, I think Gamera and Guiron have the most entertaining fight because we'll get to that a little bit later. But Guiron gets sliced in half when Gamera tucks in all his limbs and his head, and he literally morphs his shell into being like a giant spinning buzzsaw, and he flies around and then bisects Guiron literally clean in half, slices him clean in half from head to toe. And it's a really surprising and shocking kill. And how he kills Virus is also pretty cool too. Hang on, I don't remember how he kills S. Gauss. Hold on. Oops, wrong one. Oh, wait a minute. I remember now. So Gamera then, to kill S. Gauss, he flies up into the air and he spins himself like this way as the flying saucer, but then he just starts spinning all over the place and he creates this big ball of green spinning slicing energy. and Gauss is trying to shoot him down with the supersonic laser, but then Gamera just, as the spinny slicey ball, just smashes himself into S. Gauss and cuts up and slices S. Gauss to pieces, and then it just explodes. So that's a cool kill too. But how Gamera's fight with Virus is so lame. Gamera shows up, Virus extends its tentacles and grabs onto Gamera and just slams him around a couple times. And then Virus flies himself up into the air to try to catch onto the shuttle that Boko is still in. But then Gamera tucks himself into his shell, but he keeps his head out, and he flies up just like a giant missile. And while Virus is trying to shoot him down, because Virus actually has an energy attack in this show, Gamera just absorbs through the beam and just zips right through Virus and slices and breaks Virus into several pieces. Definitely a cool kill. So it's a little over the top, but Gamera killing monsters has always been kind of over the top, so it's fitting. And it is cool. And speaking of which, pro number 5 is all the monsters. We'll talk about Gamera in just a minute, but all the other monsters have really cool designs, in my opinion. Virus is probably my least favorite because, well, A, it doesn't really look like Virus all that much, but it's just a giant space squid. Again, still whoop-de-doo. It does look and move better than Virus did in Gamera versus Virus. It does look more distinct and more... It's not nearly as simple as the original Virus looked, and it doesn't look as boring as the original Virus looked. It is a giant squid, but it also looks like it kind of has crustacean-like armor plating all over it, which is kind of cool. It has hooked suckers at the end of each of its tentacles, and it can, in true Virus fashion, it can split its head into 3 pieces and then fire a thin laser beam out of that, which it only uses twice, but still, it's kind of cool. Let's see. Gauss, all the Gausses look pretty much the same as they do. They look very reminiscent of how they look like in Gamera Guardian of the Universe. S. Gauss is probably the most different, quote unquote. It's much bigger. It has much larger wings. And it has, instead of the triangular 3-point flat head that normal Gauss do from the Heisei trilogy, S. Gauss has a 4-pronged head with like webbing in between the prongs. But I think that's what it uses to increase the power of its supersonic laser. So that is kind of cool. Jiger looks okay. It looks like a giant Triceratops salamander hybrid. I do like that it's still on all 4s, but it's much less bulky and bulbous than the original Jiger looked, except in the head. Zigra also looks kind of cool, although I kind of think Zigra is a bit weaker in this show than he was in the Showa series. But I like the design actually a little bit more than the Showa series does. And they still do keep the underwater aesthetic that Zigra always had. Zigra in the Showa series looked like an alien goblin shark, whereas Zigra in this series looks like an alien stingray, which I also really do like. I like the color scheme too. It's a silverish white color. Again, kind of reminiscent of the Showa series. Guiron's probably my favorite redesigned monster in this series. And something that I do like about all the monsters in this show, despite some of them having kind of radical redesigns, you take one look at them and you're just like, that's Gauss, that's Jiger, that's Zigra, that's Guiron. They all look and feel and sound like, well, not really sound, None of them, except for Gamera, none of the monsters in this series retain their Showa roars. They have very muted, underwhelming, bellowing and screeching noises, but whatever. The point being is that all the monsters look like who they're supposed to be. Guiron's Guiron, Virus is Virus. But yeah, Guiron's probably my favorite monster that they showcase in this series. Guiron is much more agile and is much more acrobatic and flippy dippy all over the place. Like it can twist its body and even go into somersaults and like twist and spin all over the place, which is a good trait to have because kind of like the Showa version, Guiron. Oh yeah, Anthony Sarkis is down here saying, "Too bad Barugan wasn't included." I am very disappointed that Barugan was not included. I would have much rather have had Barugan be the final boss for Gamera to take on, at least like before S Gauss showed up, because unfortunately Gauss is Gamera's arch rival. I still say it's Barugan, but I would have much rather have had Barugan be the final boss for this series. Yeah, not including Barugan was kind of bullshit, but whatever. But yeah, like the Showa version, most of Guiron's body is his blade, is his blade head. And one thing I really like about this version is that they incorporate Guiron's mouth into his blade head. So when his mouth is, he has like two lower jaws that almost look kind of graboid-ish. But when his mouth is closed, his mandibles fold and mold perfectly into his blade head. But the blade is much more curved, like it curves upward, and it has serrations at the top, and the serrations go from like halfway down the blade all the way to the end of Guiron's tail. And also retaining this ability from the Showa series, Guiron can fire these like energy shurikens like from the tip of his tail and shoot them up his blade at his foes. And it kind of seems like they're energy / crystal like shuriken blades, but I think it's cooler showcased here than in the Showa series. Excuse me. So yeah, overall the monsters look cool. And you can take a look at all of them and be like, yeah, those are like, again, that's Gauss, that's Zigra, that's Guiron, that's Jiger. And I can appreciate it. At least the animators and the filmmakers did their homework in reimagining these monsters to look fresh and new for a new era, but you can still tell who they are. Just like with Tremors 5, you take one look at the graboids and be like, that's a graboid. Godzilla 2014, you take one look at Godzilla and you're like, that's Godzilla. And pro number 6, the most obvious pro of all, is Gamera himself. Now, sadly, there's all these cons that surround him that kind of diminish him in this series, but Gamera himself is still entertaining. Watching him kill all of his foes is entertaining, and just watching him be Gamera is always a lot of fun. Gamera is a cool monster, and he is still cool and fun to watch in the show. I really dig the design. It does look very, very similar to the design. Actually, I do think it is. Actually, let me check it out. And actually, let me see if I can. Hold on. How did I do this last time? Oh, crap. I can't freaking remember. Yeah, I can't remember. I can't remember how to share, guys. I'm sorry. But looking up the 2015 Gamera design and comparing it to the no, I do think it pretty much is the same design. Although I think the 2015 version, Gamera has 4 fingers, like 3 fingers and a thumb on his hands, whereas Gamera in this series has 4 fingers and a thumb, so like a human hand. But other than that, the color schemes are a bit different. In the 2015 version, Gamera is kind of a brownish, yellowish color. Um, and in this series, Gamera is a very bright, vibrant green, like this color green for all the show. Um, but other than that, he looks very similar. His shell is much more knobby and curvy and sharper than the Showa and even Heisei versions. He's much more stocky and built like a brick shithouse than he's ever looked. He's a lot more hunched over, like the Gamera 2 version of Gamera, but he looks a lot more fierce and a lot more monstrous, kind of like the Gamera 3 design from Revenge of Iris. Um, oh, never mind. Um, and all of his abilities are pretty much the same. Although something that's also taken from. Oh, wait a minute. So I remember how he kills Jiger more so. He can like cover his fist in fire, and he shoves that fist down Jiger's throat, sets her on fire on the inside, and then throws her and then blows her up with the fireball. But obviously, that's a reference to Gamera's ability in Gamera 3 Revenge of Iris when he absorbs um, Iris's fireballs and gives himself like a fire fist. Although in that case, it's more like an energy structure that he builds from his stump. Whereas in this show, he can literally just energize his fist with fire. But in this show, Gamera also he can fly. He has the sea turtle fins. He can spin like a flying saucer, and he can shoot fireballs, just like the Heisei trilogy. Which I'm disappointed that they're still sticking with the fireballs. I would much rather prefer, like for this show, I think it would have been appropriate if he did both. Like he shot the fireballs, but he could also just shoot a simple stream of fire. I would much rather see that. But how Gamera kills the Eustace Corporation, which have their base on the moon, Gamera like sucks in a bunch of energy from his surroundings, and he fires a thin green laser beam from his mouth that pierces like through the moonscape and destroys the Eustace Corporation headquarters from the Earth to the moon. He just fires this beam and snap a finger. That kind of feels like it was a like it was a inspiration from one of Godzilla Earth's abilities in the prequel novels to the Godzilla Earth trilogy. So that's kind of cool. But overall, Gamera is just typical Gamera. He gets his ass kicked too much. He wins by retreating. He kills his foes in various gory and creative ways, just like the Showa series. He is much more no nonsense and badass than the Showa series. And just overall, this version of Gamera does feel like a huge homage / adaptation of the Heisei trilogy. Like think Gamera 2 mixed with a little bit of Gamera 3. That's Gamera in this show. But yeah, the design is great. He sounds like Gamera because thankfully they do use the classic Gamera roar, but it sounds better than how it does in the Heisei trilogy. It doesn't sound muffled and muted like it did in those movies. It doesn't sound quite as crisp and clear as the Showa Gamera series, but his roar does sound better in this show. And thankfully, they don't use stock dinosaur roars like they did in Gamera the Brave. So, yeah, Gamera is cool in this show. He's the highlight of the series, but it's all the more frustrating that he's so underused. But he looks like Gamera. He sounds like Gamera. He acts like Gamera. He's big badass Gamera, so you can't really go wrong. Unless you're in this show. So that's the biggest pro that I have for Gamera Rebirth. Overall final thoughts for Gamera Rebirth. Guys, this show sucked. This was not worth waiting 17 years to see. 19 years in my case, almost. But this was just not a worthy follow-up, not a worthy new installment of the Gamera franchise. Not a good series, just not a fun piece of kaiju material or tokusatsu material to watch whatsoever. One of my least favorite installments of the Gamera franchise and of the overall kaiju genre as a whole. And I'm just going to say, if this is the best that Kadokawa can give us after 17 years of sitting on their hands with Gamera, I think two things. Toho needs to strong arm the rights to Gamera away from Kadokawa and relaunch Gamera as a Toho property, just straight up, because it's obvious that Kadokawa just doesn't know what to do with Gamera. And two, this is even further proof for me, kaiju and anime just don't mix. I'm sorry to say. So that'll about do it. I have finally completed the Gamera franchise. So look forward to a ranking review. Look forward to more episodes of Super Kaiju Binge. Next episode, I don't really know, but I think I'm going to go for something good. Especially since I don't have Netflix anymore right now. So let's have to wait until I get that again. Post your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Share this video with your friends. Look forward to future episodes. And remember, Gamera, you will believe that a turtle can fly. And I'll see